Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Anything for Taylor and anything especially for UCLA. I'm very sorry to hear about the loss of your fellow UCLA scholar, and definitely keep his family in my thoughts and prayers, and um, sort of just try to dive into a happier topic, which is adoption. Although it's a complex topic, whenever you have an adoption, it means before it, there was a lot of grief and difficulty and someone's in separation from birth family in some cases. So in any case, I'll dive in. I just have a talk. I didn't have time to fully prepare sort of a new slideshow for this year due to the illness of my dog, who may make appearances in and out in the background. But if technology allows, we might be running a slideshow in the background that so you can see some of the photos of the kids that we've helped through our adoption program. But as Taylor said, I direct the foster care adoption program at the Alliance, but I'm also a practicing adoption attorney. And it's hard to believe, but tomorrow, July 23rd, is going to be my 20th anniversary at the Alliance. So that's kind of a big deal for me, just in terms of legal profession. It does feel really good to make a longstanding commitment to a particular type of legal service that's helping others, helping the community, helping these families. But since I've been doing that for 20 years, I have had the chance to work with a lot of families, and it's really an honor. So I'm happy to be here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Alliance's adoption program, and sort of based on the talk I gave last year, I kind of had to sort of stick with that. I then wanted to focus on sort of what sort of the challenges facing adoption and what we call permanency through adoption in LA County are. And I'm going to focus on two things for this talk, which is the COVID pandemic and how that affected adoptions last year and continues into this year and into next year, no doubt. And then also just a little bit of focus on our efforts together with the Office of Child Protection to come up with a plan to help increase adoptions, in particular for older youth that are aging out of the foster care system, and whether it's at age 18 or age 21. I think Taylor, in one of the first sessions with you, went over the nuts and bolts of the dependency system. So you probably do know about AB 12. Raise your hand if you do, extended foster care. So in any case, so just to give an overview, the Alliance's adoption program, it is a foster care adoption program. So we only work on what are called agency adoptions for children and youth that have been removed from their biological parents due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment, and placed into the foster care system and under the jurisdiction of the Juvenile Dependency Court, which is located in Monterey Park. We don't handle private adoption, but so that's our focus. And we finalize more than 1/3 of all foster care adoptions done in LA County each year. And our program has been running since about 1996. And our good friends at Public Counsel have a similar adoption program, and that they've been running since 1996. And our adoption programs operate under a blanket order from the Children's Court that began 25 years ago, when there was this huge crisis in Los Angeles County of kids in foster care. It was like 50 to 60,000 at that time, but there was a backlog of 10,000 children waiting for their adoptions to be finalized. I don't have time to go into all the reasons, but it was a crisis. And Alliance of Public Counsel came together with DCFS and the Children's Court to come up with this idea of creating these programs that would rely on pro bono attorneys so that we had the volume to finalize a large number of adoptions, and a concept called Adoption Day, which I'm going to get into briefly, but so that we could open the courthouse on originally Saturdays to finalize 300-400 adoptions at a time. just to bring down that backlog. And that was successful, but the adoption programs have continued nonstop for all these 25 years as the way that the individuals and families adopting children can be represented free of charge to finalize their adoption so that that backlog never develops again. So we do those foster care adoptions. We also do a specialty adoption type of adoption called non-minor dependent adoption, or NMD adoption. And non-minor dependents, those are the youth that are in foster care until their 18th birthday and are aging out of the system without a permanent family, permanent plan. And, 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, California passed AB 12, creating a new extended foster care all the way up until your 21st birthday. And so a large number of children are in the AB 12 extended foster care program. And in connection with AB 12, through cleanup legislation, another law was enacted in 2013 that created this new type of adoption for those youth called non-minor dependent adoption. So it made it possible, because the normal adoption law in the California Family Code is for minors, under 18. So this created a new type of adoption for youth between 18 and 20 that they could still be adopted through the juvenile court and with the same adoption assistance benefits and Medi-Cal benefits that adoptive parents of minors obtain. So that created an incentive to still try to do permanency planning for older youth without losing their benefits. So they can both be adopted after 18 and still receive those benefits of the AB 12 program plus AAP and Medi-Cal. So the Alliance is really the only group that is working on those non-minor dependent adoptions with DCFS and the court. And might seem like a small number, but since 2014, when we sort of launched this, we've done 50. It's only an average of 8 or 9 per year. Still, it's working. In addition, the Alliance, we also do work on probation adoptions. So youth that are in the juvenile delinquency system on probation, some of them have even crossed over from the foster care system to the delinquency system. The probation officers actually have the same responsibility as social workers do to do permanency planning for those youth that are in the delinquency system. So again, through partnership with Children's Court and with LA County Probation, starting about 2005, we've done whatever probation adoption was able to come through. It's only been 7 over these last, whatever it is, 15 years. I'm bad at math. They're very difficult to do in terms of placement, but in theory, we're assisting with these probation adoptions when they come through. And in addition, so that's our program. And we also created National Adoption Day, which was built on our Adoption Saturday program. The idea of opening the courthouse on a Saturday. In 2000, the Alliance decided to take that nationally and all around the country, build this model where cities would open on a Saturday before Thanksgiving to finalize adoptions and raise awareness about foster care adoption. And we based it on the LA model. So after 20 years of National Adoption Day, it's now celebrated in all 50 states, and something like 80,000 children have had their adoptions finalized around National Adoption Day. And it's raised a lot of awareness nationwide on this issue of children. It's over 100,000 nationwide that are in foster care waiting for adoption. So we're proud of that. And then the Alliance, our adoption program internally works holistically. So we receive our adoption cases from LA County DCFS under that blanket order I mentioned. And we will finalize adoptions, which involves our network of pro bono attorneys and myself, preparing the legal forms, filing the cases at court, holding the hearings. But we also feel a responsibility to make sure that before that child or youth leaves the foster care system, that they have received all the therapeutic services, all the educational supports, the right level of AAP benefits before they exit foster care with their new family. We have found over the years that DCFS doesn't always meet that level. So we've created other programs. Our education program, Jill Rowland, I believe, spoke at the last session. We have a healthcare program that specializes in Medi-Cal issues. And then we have our public benefits program that specializes in getting the right funding for these families. So if we spot an issue, we can cross-refer to our program. And while we're finalizing the adoption, we will work on getting that service completed for that family. So for example, if they need an IEP, we'll finalize the adoption, but we'll keep the education case going until they get that IEP in place. So this is how we feel at the Alliance, that we're supporting children and youth and families, not only to complete their adoptions, but to make it a solid adoption that's going to be strong and able to move forward. I also wanted to mention, and I don't think it worked running our slideshow. Tiffany, is that going to be possible? No?
Yeah, I don't think so, but if you would like to share your screen, that could work on your end, but it's not working on my end.
All right, sorry, Brittany. Okay, that's okay. I probably won't be able to pull it off, so we won't do it. But Taylor thought it would be important to also just give you a snapshot of the clients that we serve. So when I say that we do adoptions, who in LA County can be approved for adoption? It's everyone. So we work with adopting individuals and adopting couples, adopting families that are relatives, grandma, grandpa, aunt and uncle, sometimes even older siblings are adopting their younger siblings. We also finalize adoptions for non-relative foster parents that have stepped forward and gotten certified because they want to raise a family through adoption, and they want to do that through foster care adoption. So they go, and whether you're a relative or non-relative foster parent, they all now under new state law called the Resource Family Approval Process, everyone who seeks to adopt, whether a relative or not, goes through this Resource Family Approval Process, which is a bit timely, but if you're approved, you can adopt. And it's individuals, couples, LGBTQ. We also work at some families that are adopting are, older, let's say grandma's adopting, but she's getting a bit up in age and they want to make sure they have a backup. Sometimes you've got grandma adopting with their own adult daughter. And, also, as you might imagine, the children in foster care in Los Angeles County is a wide-ranging demographic, but the most represented demographic is Latino, and which I don't have the numbers, but it's high, something like 40%, and something upwards of 30% are African-American children. So they're overemphasized in the population. But fortunately, the families stepping forward are also multiracial. So I think in that regard, Los Angeles County has actually been a path breaker in terms of if you can meet the standards, you can adopt, and these children do need homes. So in any case, that's a basic overview of what we do at the Alliance. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of quick things, because I'm already running on the clock, I can see. But so the challenges that we're facing in Los Angeles County with adoptions is the first thing that I just alluded to, which is the high volume. So we already had a high number of kids that were sort of in a backlog to be adopted due to the implementation of that RFA. It put everything sort of back. And so a lot of cases were starting to come our way when the pandemic hit. But just to give you the context, right now, there are 2,500 legally freed children, 5,600 children that haven't been legally freed yet, but that have a plan of adoption, so it's going in that direction. That is a lot of children coming through within this year and next year and the year after. And it's coming at a time when we've absolutely, like everybody, been knocked down by COVID. So I wanted to mention with COVID, it's just sort of an interesting thing for you to know. If you can remember back to March 2020 when the COVID pandemic hit, you know, everybody went on the stay-at-home orders, and that had a significant impact on everyone's ability, obviously, to do adoptions, whether it was the DCFS social workers who have to visit the home, the Children's Courthouse, which houses hundreds and hundreds of children and families per day for their hearings, or the Alliance and our attorneys, everybody working remote. And so the courthouse, in fact, was closed, and they went to a very small staff, all of that. And yet very quickly, you know, March, April, May, you know, people get very panicked. You need your adoption finalized. These are families that need the legal status of being the adoptive parent so they can make medical decisions, they can enroll their kids in school, this and that. And so there was just a lot of hand wringing. What were we going to do? And the Alliance, the presiding judge at Children's Court asked the Alliance and Public Counsel to sort of do an analysis of what are our options. The California Family Code does require in-person adoption hearings. But we did some research. The California Family Code does already allow telephonic adoption hearings or video hearings in certain circumstances. But the judge made it very clear they didn't even have the capacity to be able to do remote or WebEx hearings for adoptions. They were going to use the capacity they had to do the dependency cases, like detention hearings at the beginning when the kids come in. But they only had 8 judges able to do this, and it was just kind of a nightmare. But we were asked, is there a way to do adoptions without having a hearing, even without having a video hearing? So we looked into it, and the answer is sort of no under the Family Code. But the governor and the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court did issue orders that gave pretty broad emergency authority to the Superior Court to, take steps to be able to complete their functions, notwithstanding the pandemic. So we did come up with a process, and we've been doing it since June 2020 to be able to finalize adoptions without a hearing, without the family appearing at a hearing. And they would be done by the judge in chambers, whether that was at their home office or one of the 8 judges that was actually at the courthouse. They would finalize the adoptions electronically, signing the forms in their office. And on the family's end, unfortunately, they didn't get to have their hearing, but they needed to go out to a notary and sign the important adoption consent form in front of a notary and set up all new processes to do electronic filing and be able to complete those adoptions. And there was a lot of ramping up to train all of our attorneys how to do that. We'd never done electronic adoptions before, but it was successful. And so from basically June 2020 to this very day, we have been finalizing adoptions through the remote process. And I want to say in 2020, or just to give you perspective, in 2019, LA County did 1,875 adoptions. In 2020, notwithstanding the pandemic, we still did 1,721 adoptions, which is only down 8%. And I think that's pretty amazing. But in addition to the remote process, it's a long story and I'm already running out of time, but we kept pushing that these families want to have an in-person adoption. They can't have that. They should at least be able to have a video hearing. And, finally in April of this year, Judge Greenberg, the presiding judge, notified us that the court felt it now had the capacity to allow WebEx adoption hearings, at least in 2 courtrooms down there. And so that started in April. So we're now able to finalize adoptions through those 2 options, remote and WebEx hearings. So the family actually appears before the judge through Zoom. And so we're working on that. We're going to have another WebEx National Adoption Day this November. We had one last November where, on that Saturday, a dozen virtual courtrooms were opened and we did 150 adoptions. So we just keep pushing through. But I think it's a very strong reflection on the LA Superior Court. I know other things are happening at criminal court, but with respect to the Children's Court, I think they've done a credible job of helping to keep these adoptions going. And we have, despite the pandemic. I think I only have a couple minutes, right, Taylor? I think basically, since I talked sort of about all this, I don't have a lot of time to go into the second topic, but all I was going to really focus on was to let you guys know that in addition to just finalize the adoptions through the COVID pandemic and those challenges, we've been under a challenge for the last 2 years, 2 or 3 years, together with the Office of Child Protection, which is now led by retired Judge Nash. They are operating under a 2 or 3 year old motion from the LA County Board of Supervisors to take a look at permanency in LA County. What can we do to increase permanency overall, but especially for the youth that are aging out of foster care? And I just want to throw one statistic at you. 12% of the youth are aging out of the system without a permanent family. And so that's unacceptable. So as part of those recommendations, we're working with Judge Nash and the OCP on how to increase permanency for older youth. And the Alliance has a major part in that because one of the recommendations is increase awareness about non-minor dependent adoption and sort of help break some of the myths that keep youth from wanting to be adopted. And one of them is that they'll lose all their benefits. So we're doing a lot of trainings on, no, you don't lose your benefits. They go to 21. Yes, you could be adopted. A lot of training of social workers that they have a responsibility to continue doing permanency planning for youth 18 to 20 in extended foster care. And so we're really excited about that. The pandemic has thrown a monkey wrench in a lot of things, but we're going to keep pushing forward with that as one of our emphasis. And I did want to allow time for questions.
All right, Cynthia, thank you so much. Any questions? I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions before we turn it over to Andrea.
I see one question. Is it hard to adopt as a single parent? Emphatic answer, no. At least in LA County, it's not harder. I can't emphasize enough. As long as you as that single parent, meet the general criteria that you have the ability to provide a loving home, you are able to support them, etc. It's not a counter criteria that you be paired with another parent. So we do have a lot of single moms and dads. It's not the same in other states. There are still a lot of regressive states that are not approving single parents and a lot of veiled things, to block, for example, LGBTQ adoptive parents. Your state law might still say that to adopt, you have to be married. So, but that's not the case in California. And then I see one more. Can you say more about the demographics of the children who age out of the adoption system? I probably can't. What I can say is it would be a microcosm of the demographics of everyone in foster care, which are what I said to you earlier. But the ones that age out, I will say, these are the youth that have been in the system like their whole life. And for whatever reason, there was no relative that stepped up or no other family, or they have maybe more conditions or issues going on. But without doubt, the statistics show that youth that age out without even just a connection, even if it's not adoption, to a permanent, to an adult that can provide support, they do have poorer outcomes like homelessness, lack of education, crime. So I think on the time I have, I probably can't say much more about the demographics. Probation adoption, real quick, is just, so if you're a youth and you commit a crime and you go into the juvenile delinquency system, which is the system that addresses crimes committed by children, you're in the delinquency system, as opposed to the foster care system, which is known as the dependency system. They're in a system involuntarily because they were removed from their parents' care. And so probation is if one of the youth that's over on the delinquency side, as part of their penance, whatever, for their crime, they're put on probation. That's what I meant by probation adoption. So youth that are in the probation system, they have their own probation officer, and those probation officers actually are trained to do social work planning. They're supposed to be helping them find families. So I'm sorry, I can't give a better answer on such a short time. I don't want to cut into Andrea's time. But I hope in my sort of all over the place talk, you've gotten at least an idea of adoption and what we do. And I'm happy to continue to answer questions through chat if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And thank you to the Alliance for Children's Rights for being such a big partner in our summer academy. The Alliance has spoken quite a few times throughout the program, and we're very grateful to all of our partners there. I also just, again, want to acknowledge that Cynthia is available for further questions if anybody has them, and that the Alliance for Children's Rights is also home to a wonderful internship program for students across various degree programs. So feel free to visit their website. I think maybe Brittany, if you don't mind, can put Alliance for Children's Rights website in the chat. You guys can check it out. I work there, happy to talk about it as well anytime. And with that, I'm really pleased to thank Cynthia and to welcome Andrea Ramos. Andrea is a clinical professor of law at Southwestern School of Law. She is a wonderful, wonderful expert in this field, has worked in children's rights and immigration advocacy for a number of years. I can't think of anyone more prolific in the space around the connection between foster care and immigration, which is a huge issue for our kids and for our families. And Andrea can speak to all the reasons why. But again, welcome, Andrea. We're so thrilled to have you and really look forward to your talk. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And before I share my screen, I just really want to take a moment to recognize Taylor and Cynthia. So I believe most of the audience is students, and so you're the younger generation. But I think it's really cool to just kind of see the connections just here today. So like Taylor mentioned, she was an intern when she was in law school when I worked at Public Counsel. And Cynthia and I worked together for many years when I was at Public Counsel in the Children's Rights Project. And so we go back many years. And as you could hear from Cynthia's talk, and she's a trailblazer, and you're really lucky to hear from her today. I mean, she's been doing this work for many, many, many years. So, and it's really cool for me to see this connection today. And I think just as an aside, nothing to do with my presentation, but the public interest world is really amazing. And it's amazing because of the people who work in it, because we love what we do. I mean, honestly, we really care. And you know I hear people who talk about how much they hate their job. And I always say, well, I don't hate my job. I actually love my job. And it's because of our commitment to the issue. So I think it's kind of neat for US students to see that and to see how much good work is out there and great opportunities for all of you. So with that, I'm going to hopefully share my screen. Of course, I feel like it's always an issue. So give me a second because I don't see my, let's see. Okay, here we go. So, all right, can everyone see it? Okay, great. It's like the question that everyone asks in every Zoom presentation. Okay, so I am going to first just give a little background on why immigration relief matters. And some of these things are actually issues that Cynthia talked about. Immigration relief provides stability to children and family, safety and permanency, as Cynthia just ended her presentation on the importance of permanency. Some reasons, I just included a few kind of issues that are very relevant to someone who does not have status. Immigration relief provides greater access to higher education because it provides access to federal loans and grants. And though we're really lucky here in California, we have lots of great laws to protect undocumented students. We have the California DREAM Act, for example, that provides access to state loans for higher education, but no access to federal loans. And if you were to go out of state to go to school, you'd have to check whether that state even allows an undocumented student to enroll in higher education, because some states do not. Immigration relief also provides you with a driver's license, which obviously is very important here in Southern California. In California, undocumented individuals can access an AB 60 license. That's the name that everyone calls it due to the law called AB 60. But it does have restrictions, and it also identifies you essentially as having an AB 60 license. So essentially you're disclosing your status. So if you have immigration status, you can get a regular driver's license. And then of course, employment opportunities and an increase in wages. So with immigration status, you're not relegated to this underground economy where you can often be exploited. Maybe you're not even paid your wages, and then you don't feel like you have access to any kind of protection, leading then possibly to homelessness. And then really the biggest issue, which is living without the fear of being removed. If you do not have immigration status, whether you're a child or an adult, if you are detected by immigration, you can be placed in removal proceedings and removed from the United States. So we're going to talk a little bit about just a few pathways to status. And just briefly to just provide some context, we're going to be focusing on someone who's undocumented, so someone who does not have legal status. You could be undocumented because you entered the United States without papers, you entered illegally, so you don't have papers. Or it could be that you entered with a visa, but you overstayed your visa and now you're undocumented. So if you are undocumented, you want to figure out whether you have a pathway to status and figure out whether any immigration relief is available. If you think that you might have an ability to immigrate, or you just have questions, the most important thing to do is talk with an immigration attorney who would be able to assess all of your options and hopefully get you on the path to obtaining a green card, which is the term most people think about when they think of lawful permanent residency status. So that would be the next status that you would have. If you're undocumented, you would go to a lawful permanent resident, which would allow you to live and work permanently in the United States. And you would have a green card, which would show that you have that status. And then next, it would be apply for US citizenship. And that would be after 5 years, usually, unless you married someone with US citizenship, which is then would allow you to get citizenship after 3 years, or apply for citizenship, I should say. And then once you're a US citizen, that would be the highest form of status that you can have in the United States, where you're protected from removal and you can, of course, live and work in the United States permanently. So we're going to talk about just a few different options today because we don't have a lot of time, and I'm going to focus on special immigrant juvenile status, talk a little bit about the U visa, and provide a little bit of an update on DACA. Even though DACA is actually not a pathway to status, it is a possible option to at least get a work permit and the ability to stay in the US for a little bit of time. So special immigrant juvenile status. Special immigrant juvenile status is a humanitarian-based form of immigration relief for children who have suffered parental maltreatment. So what that means is a child who has been abused, neglected, or abandoned might be able to access this relief if they are under juvenile court jurisdiction. And actually, Cynthia did me a favor and talked a little bit about different types of juvenile court jurisdiction. So Cynthia focused on, for example, juvenile court jurisdiction involving kids in dependency, so in the foster care system. But juvenile court also means kids in delinquency, so that it would be a child who has committed a crime and is now under the jurisdiction of the delinquency court. That child might be able to apply for SIJS. It also includes kids who may be in a family court proceeding where it's sort of mom versus dad in a custody proceeding, and in probate court where a child might try to get a guardianship. So there's many different kinds of juvenile court systems where the court might be able to make these special findings that have to be made for special immigrant juvenile status. The benefit of SIJS is that it is a pathway to lawful permanent residency. So it is a way for a child to obtain a green card. So in a nutshell, obviously we don't have a lot of time to go into all of the requirements in detail, but these are the basic requirements. The child has to be physically present in the US, so here in the United States when he or she applies, and must be here throughout the whole process. Child must be unmarried, under the age of 21, and they have to have this special order that the juvenile court issues that basically allows them to move forward with the application. And I just have here a note that a parent can never benefit through a child who has obtained SIJS. So this type of immigration application is only for the child. No one else can benefit from that application. So one of the downsides of the special immigrant juvenile status is that there is a really long waiting period. So there's this procedure where you first file your petition, and then you have to wait until you have a visa available to apply for the green card, which is your goal, right? Is to get that green card. And what happened is that there's been this huge backlog for children from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And I included here a graphic actually from an article in the Marshall Report, which wrote a great article about the backlog and how it affects children. So it's basically about a 2 to 3 year wait for kids to apply for a green card. That's really significant for kids who are in any kind of court system, especially kids in foster care and kids in the delinquency system, because as Cynthia was talking about, often they don't have a strong family connection. They don't have an adult who can help and support them. And they feel really lost as they're waiting for their green card and very frustrated. So it's really problematic for kids in those systems to have to wait many, many years before they can apply for a green card. So why do we have this backlog? And again, this is all kind of like in a nutshell, but essentially there have been many more kids entering the US from those countries that I mentioned, Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, for many different reasons, mainly escaping violence in home country. But so there's been many kids entering the US, many more children applying for SIJS. And so essentially the government essentially ran out of visas. There is a limit on the number of visas available to kids in this category. There's only 10,000 per year. And then each country in the world is allocated 700 visas. So it's a really small number. And so right now we have many more SIJS petitions than there are visas available. So there's this really long backlog. And so the only way to get in line is to file that I-360, and then you just have to essentially wait your turn to be able to file for the green card. And as someone who works with kids in the system, I can tell you that it is just incredibly frustrating. I think many of my clients don't believe me when I tell them that there is a backlog. They think I'm doing something wrong in their case, and why can't I speed it up? And it's just really, really frustrating. But hopefully we are actually working. One of the things that I'm working on right now is I'm working with a group of advocates to see if we can change the law. And that's something that I'm kind of working on and hoping that maybe we'll get some change with this new administration. So next, I'm going to move on to a different form of immigration relief known as the U visa. So the U visa is also a humanitarian-based immigration relief, and it's for survivors of crime. Essentially, the folks who qualify for the U visa are crime victims and certain family members. So unlike SIJS, with the U visa, you can include certain family members. So it is a way to help more than just the crime victim. And the benefit of the U visa is that it is also a pathway to lawful permanent residency. The U visa takes even longer than SIJS, so it's sort of like a second option. If you are eligible for SIJS, that would be your first, because the U visa is now taking about 10 years. So it is a really, 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 really long wait to be able to get your U visa, but at least it is an option that is out there. The eligibility requirements are the crime has to have occurred in the United States. So you have to have been a victim of a crime in the United States. You have to have cooperated or are currently cooperating with law enforcement it could be in the investigation or the prosecution of the crime. And that could be cooperating with police. It could be cooperating with DCFS, with the Department of Children and Family Services, or it could be cooperating, for example, with a judge. So with a judge, a prosecutor, there are many different people who can actually help out with the U visa case and establish that you have cooperated. And then the person has to have suffered substantial physical or mental harm as a result of being the crime victim. The crimes that essentially allow you to apply for the U visa are serious violent crimes. Most of the cases involve victims of domestic violence. It's about 50% or so. And then I listed some of the other crimes and the percentages. But as you can see, they're very serious crimes. They're listed in the immigration law, which states which types of crime would make you essentially eligible to apply for the U visa. So if you or a family member has been a victim of a crime, it's possible that someone could apply for the U visa and include certain family members. So essentially, a parent victim, for example, could apply for their child as long as the child is unmarried and under 21. If the child is the victim of the crime, then the child who is under 21 can petition for a parent and can include siblings as long as the siblings are under the age of 18. So I know I rattled up a lot of different little requirements, and I think that really just shows you why it's important for folks to always talk to an immigration attorney to make sure that they're assessing all of the possible options. But the benefit of the U visa is that it does allow you to include family members. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about DACA. I wanted to include DACA today, especially because there's been a new court ruling so that I can share a little bit about what is going on with DACA. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it is now partially available. So this was a program that first started under President Obama, and then it was rescinded under the Trump administration, and then it was really revived through litigation. And now the current administration supports DACA, but there's been a recent court ruling that's changed some things. So DACA is essentially just temporary authorization to be present in the United States, but it doesn't grant any form of legal status. So it's not lawful status. It's basically just the government saying, we're going to exercise prosecutorial discretion, which is just a decision to not prosecute you for an immigration violation. So we've decided that we know that you're here essentially because you have to apply for DACA, and we're authorizing you to be present in the US, and we're authorizing you to be here for a period of 2 years under this special deferred action. So it's like deferring action on your case. And with DACA, you also get to apply for a work permit, which is the huge benefit of DACA, is you can apply for a 2-year employment authorization. And so I'm sure you've probably heard stories of the many DACA recipients who have gone on to higher education and have now, they're doctors, lawyers, teachers, nurses. I mean, they're just working in all different fields, and they're just really benefiting from this DACA status, if you will, even though it's not lawful status, and this work permit. So the update on DACA is, as of last Friday, so July 16th, there's been a change in the ability to apply for DACA. So DACA has gone through a lot of changes, as I mentioned, because it was announced and implemented by the Obama administration. It was rescinded by the Trump administration. but many advocates, lawyers sued, and it was sort of brought back by this litigation essentially this year. So starting like in January 2021, you could file for DACA again. You could renew it before that, but you could file new applications as of January 2021. Well, there was a court ruling on Friday out of Texas, and the court essentially held that the judge found that DACA is essentially illegal and will not allow the government to process any new DACA applications. But under the ruling, the judge is still allowing folks who have DACA to renew, at least for the temporary, like this temporary period until further action on this case. So what happened in this case is that it went to the judge who first reviewed it way back when in 2014. And so they kind of brought it back before the same judge, kind of knowing that he would probably make the similar ruling. And in fact, he did. So as of today, if you have never had DACA, you essentially, I mean, you could technically file and apply, but the government is prohibited from processing any new applications. I personally wouldn't file for someone because I would be afraid that you would lose your money. There's a $500 filing fee, and I don't know whether you would be able to get that back. So if you filed now, it would just be held until further notice, meaning further rulings from the court. If you have a pending DACA application, so a first-time DACA application, it's now just frozen until further notice by the court. And again, this ruling doesn't affect current DACA recipients. So if you have DACA, it will not affect your current DACA status. And your DACA status and your work permit will remain valid until kind of further notice, essentially. So for folks who have DACA, they definitely should renew as soon as they're able to. So you can renew your DACA usually within 5 months of the expiration date. And I would say, given this recent court ruling, it would be, really important to move quickly and not wait to renew, because we don't know what's going to happen in this case. We don't know if there's going to be other decisions that will even affect current DACA recipients. So if you have DACA and you're able to renew, I would say do so as soon as possible. You can renew if you have, current DACA and it's going to expire within 5 months. You can renew even if it expired and you kind of let it slide and you forgot about it or you didn't have the money, you can still renew. You still would just have to pay the filing fee. If you lose your work permit, you can also renew. So if you had it in some time, at some point in time, you're still good to go and you can renew. And the only caveat that I have is if you have been arrested or convicted, or if a person has been arrested or convicted of a crime, it's imperative to talk with an immigration attorney to assess whether that will affect your status. Another question I often get is then what happens to the Social Security card? So if you have a Social Security card, it is valid for life. You don't renew a Social Security card, it is valid for life. A DACA recipient will have a restricted Social Security card that looks something like this, that I put the red line around it. So that doesn't, that's not on the card, but what you see on a Social Security card that is restricted is valid for work only with DHS authorization. So that's what a restricted Social Security card would look like. So your social remains valid for life, and you can use your social even if your DACA has expired for education purposes, banking, many different reasons. As many of us know, you have to use your Social Security card. So that would remain valid. And last, I just wanted to add, I tried to just cobble together a few resources that I think are helpful for folks who work with children and families. The two agencies I listed, National Immigration Law Center and the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, are amazing and have pretty much everything and anything you would need on any kind of immigration issue, including there's a report by the ILRC on child welfare practices for immigrant children and families, and it's a great toolkit. I think it's about 100-some pages, so it's everything you kind of need to know if you're working in this area involving kids in the dependency system. You'll probably be able to learn something about working with them in this report. And then there's a great resource for immigrant youth called Living in the United States. And it's written in a real child, youth-friendly language, so really easy to understand. And I actually always print it out and give it to my clients because I think it's helpful for them to have as a resource and maybe to share with others. And I think that was it. Yes, that was my last slide. So it looks like I have a few questions if anyone, a few minutes if anyone has questions.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Any questions from the students? Andrea, if none, I'll sort of ask one if you don't mind. Can you speak to the situation for kids that are currently in foster care and undocumented? How does that come up? And what are their options or their solutions? I know you talked about SIGIS, but I just want to really connect those dots for the students so that they can see that kids in foster care can be undocumented, and that's why they need all of these relief options.
Yeah, hopefully the child has at least disclosed where they were born. And so that would be a way for the attorney for the child and the social worker to identify them as at least as not being born in the United States, and then to take the next step to figure out whether the child has status. So often the kids don't know, depending on their age, whether they have status or not. So it's really up to that social worker and attorney to dig deeper to figure out whether the child has immigration status. And if the child is in LA County, we're really lucky because LA County DCFS has a special unit that works with and supports kids who are undocumented and need to apply for status. And the agency that works for children represents Children's Law Center. So they're the attorneys who represent the kids. They also have attorneys now that help connect the kids to immigration lawyers who can then hopefully help them apply for either SIJS or the U visa. For some reason, they're not eligible for SIJS, or both if they want to. And maybe, well, now not DACA, but it's possible that you could even have thrown in DACA in there if needed.
Thank you so much.
Taylor?
Yes.
Could I say one thing quickly to sort of tie together the adoption and the immigration portion? It might be interesting to the students to know, if you have the question, can you adopt from LA County Foster Care if you are not documented yourself? So can the adoptive parent? The answer is yes. You do not have to be a US citizen to be approved to adopt. You do have to be stable. So if you're undocumented and sort of actively at risk of deportation, that could be a problem, just because that means that's not necessarily a stable placement for the child. But you can't be deprived of the ability to adopt based on that status. I also want to mention, what Andrea was just saying about this DCFS Special Immigration Unit. I see the question just popped in. I was just about to answer that. Yes, we do see kids coming through that are born in another country. Let's just use Mexico as an example, right across our border. They absolutely can be adopted, and DCFS is often trying to find relatives that themselves may live in Mexico. But the key is, if you are not a documented citizen, before doing the adoption, they do have to go through the DCFS Special Immigration Unit and get that green card. It's very important. If you do an adoption without that, it's way much more difficult for that child they have to go through the normal process, that the whole naturalization thing. And so once they get their green card, it's good to go. And another interesting fact, if you're under the age of 16 and you're born in another country, you get your green card, you're approved to get the adoption done. If your adopting parents happen to be US citizens, that youth can attain automatic US citizenship through the adoption. So that's kind of interesting.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And I was actually going to say, can we connect these two topics? I think they're super related, and I appreciate you doing so. Any other questions for Andrea? Andrea, you have a question here in the chat about helping young people avoid scams or unscrupulous immigration lawyers.
So I would say connect them to any of the resources that I mentioned, the NILC or ILRC. Or if you did a search for nonprofit agencies in Los Angeles, there's so many. We talked about Public Counsel already. Public Counsel has an immigration project. The Alliance works, also has immigration. They have, at least I know one attorney, I think, doing SIJS work. So there's so many nonprofits. I think the key is to make sure to connect them with a nonprofit agency and just share resources.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. Your work has helped so many children and families over the years. It's really exciting to have you be a part of our summer program this year, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And I hope that, for our students, you can see just how much all of these topics connect. We've really tried to paint a holistic picture of serving children and families. And even today, through the talk between Andrea and Cynthia, you can see how, before Cynthia might complete an adoption, she might be on the phone with Andrea to say, like, we've got to work out this immigration issue first. Can you help me do that? And then Andrea says, that's done. Now you can go back and do your adoption. And in the meantime, who knows what other needs will come up. But we all really try in this field to be really collaborative and really work across the systems, because kids need that. They have multiple needs. So thank you both for painting that picture today. Anything in closing, Andrea?
I think so. I think I'm good. Thank you again for having me.
We were so honored. Thank you. And we hope to have you back for who knows what else we'll come up with. But thank you for being with us.
All right. Bye. Bye, Cynthia.
Take care, Andrea. Okay. Now we are really excited to go to Ariel Busamante, my good friend and colleague. Ariel, we're so happy to have you. Ariel is with the Los Angeles LGBT Center, where she is a training manager there. And like I said, a wonderful colleague, friend, and amazing advocate, especially for LGBTQ youth. I have seen her in action over the years, and she is not to be messed with when it comes to our kids who are so often so underserved. So Ariel, thanks for being back with us for the second year in a row, and for just being such a great partner to the UCLA Pritzker Center. You've done a few events with us, and we're really happy to have you here today. Take it away.
Of course. Thank you, Taylor, for having me. And I echo Cynthia's sentiment of, whenever you come calling, Taylor, the answer is undoubtedly yes. So always happy to be here with you all. So again, my name is Ariel Busamante. I'm the capacity building manager at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and ella in Spanish. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the center, about our RISE program that works with LGBTQ plus, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning young people in the system. But before I do that, I just want to really quickly touch a little bit on my background, because we've had two really phenomenal presentations that have largely focused on some legal background pieces. And I know that for many of you, you may be coming from a variety of different disciplines or not quite sure what the future holds for you. And working in or around systems of care is really neat, because you can have a variety of educational backgrounds and disciplines and things that got you there. And it doesn't have to be strictly, an MSW or a social work degree. It doesn't have to be an attorney representing these kids. There's so many different things that you can be doing in this field. I've been doing this work for about 15 years. Before I was at the center, I was at the ACLU. And although I'm not an attorney, I was working on cases around foster youth education rights and LGBT student rights. So I was doing a lot of community organizing, advocacy, a lot of policy work, which is essentially initially how I got to know Taylor. And so just know that there's a lot of different ways that you can be doing this work. I also was a resource parent myself. So I was the foster parent to a young family member. And so I often bring that experience into my work, having gone through that, particularly during a time in LA County, as Cynthia was talking about, RFA, the Resource Family Approval Process, and continuum of care reform. So two big changes that have been happening over the past few years in the state's foster care system. So all that to say, as I mentioned, I'm always happy to talk to folks just about different ways that your career can develop, depending on what you're thinking you want to do. With that in mind, the center, if those of for any of you who aren't familiar, we are the world's oldest and largest LGBT social service organization. We have 10 locations across LA County, over 800 staff, and then every single month we serve over 42,000 clients, and that's a variety of services. I love that, Andrea was just talking about immigration. We do have a really robust immigration law project. And so we support folks who are seeking asylum or refugee status. We serve folks who are experiencing intimate partner violence and a variety of other legal issues that may require expertise from attorneys who understand LGBTQ+ identity. Not all of our clients, of course, are LGBTQ+, so I should note that. We have an LGBT senior center. We have health services, including everything from primary care to mental health to specialty health services like gender affirming care. And we have a cultural arts program, a policy and community building program, all of which, by the way, these programs all take interns. They're always looking for additional support. So again, if that's something that you're looking to just explore more, feel free to contact me to learn more about that or other volunteer opportunities. And then there's our youth services department, and that's the department I belong to. And we primarily serve youth 24 and younger. Most of these youth are youth who are currently experiencing homelessness. About a third of them have had some contact with the child welfare system, whether here in LA County or in their sort of home of origin or location of origin. And so we have a drop-in center for those youth. We have a residential program, but we also have a number of other services that don't just serve youth experiencing homelessness, but youth in a variety of settings and situations. All of the services we provide at the center are free or low cost. So again, if you want to learn more, go to our website or feel free to touch base with me afterwards. So the RISE program, which stands for Recognize, Intervene, Support, and Empower, is a program that started as a federally funded research project. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about just our origins. Then I'm going to talk about this population, and then I'm going to go back to kind of talking about what we're doing to serve this population more effectively. When we started, we were tasked with this idea of looking at the disproportionate numbers of LGBTQ+ young people in systems of care, namely foster care, knowing that nationally there was overrepresentation, but there hadn't been a ton of research done around this. And on top of that, there hadn't really been done research on how to address these issues. And that's something, again, commonly you're going to see. You're going to see lots of research being done to understand an issue or understand a population, but it's a lot harder to come up with services and programs and things that respond to that. One of the other pieces that we've always struggled with, and especially on this broader issue of sort of special issues and unique populations, is when it comes to funding streams, when it comes to, whether it be a government agency or otherwise, saying, here's money to do this work that we know is necessary, they're typically looking for things that are evidence-based. And that can be really hard when you start to look at marginalized populations or historically excluded populations, because again, the solutions that have been looked at haven't always been looked at in a way that's responsive to the needs of a population, if that makes sense. So our job was to better understand this population and ultimately reduce the number of those youth in care, increase their permanency options, and overall decrease the bias and discrimination young people were experiencing while they were in care through education and coaching of the adults who serve them. So to give you sort of a sense of who we're talking about, when we're talking about LGBTQ+ young people generally, we're looking at around 10 to 12% of the general youth population. More recent studies actually indicated that may be even higher. Anytime we're looking, data, I love data, I love evaluation, I love all of this, and it's an imperfect science, especially when we're talking about human beings. We're talking about folks who maybe have a distrust of the system. And so trying to get an accurate number, we're never going to have that perfect number. But in any event, around 10 to 12%. However, when we start to look at other negative experiences in life that disrupt this idea of permanency that Cynthia talked about earlier, we see that around 40% at least of young people who are experiencing homelessness are LGBTQ+. When we see young people in the juvenile justice, probation, delinquency systems, that number is around 20%. And as you can imagine, as we start to look at other demographics and intersections, these numbers are going to shift. So for example, in California, at least 30% of young people in girls' detention facilities self-identify as LGBTQ+. And then within the child welfare system, nationally, at least 23% of young people in the child welfare system self-identify as LGBTQ+. When we did our research study with UCLA, we did that with the Williams Institute. So they've been an amazing research partner over the years, and Bianca Wilson in particular. We found that around 1 in 5, again, young people, of those 1 in 5, we also found that, again, unsurprisingly, over 90% of those youth were also youth of color, so primarily Black and brown young people. We also found other things like around a third of those young people had at least one parent born outside of this country. So when you start to think about the complexities of any family unit and the different needs that they're going to have, we're not looking just at the child, we're not just looking at the parent or caregiver, we're looking at them holistically. And then the most recent study out of pediatrics indicated that about 1 in 3 young people in the child welfare system self-identify as LGBTQ+. So more and more, there's research coming out to better understand the prevalence of this population. Suffice to say that it is a complete overrepresentation compared to the general population. And then last but not least, when we're thinking about the school-based environment, so going to K through 12 education settings, over 85% of young people, whether or not they belong to the community or not, report some type of bullying or harassment or discrimination because their peers or adults in those settings perceive them to be part of the community. And I name all of this because when we're thinking about, again, that idea of permanency and that picture that Cynthia started to paint for us, it's important to understand that permanency is and should be a really holistic thing, right? So I love, Cynthia, you talked about, well, a family may go through the adoption process, but maybe they have an IEP and they need education support. You want to support them in those things. You want that family unit to be supported. And the same idea goes for our methodology in working with any young person and or their family unit. Depending on who you talk to in the system, you may have a very particular focus on what permanency means to you because of your role in that case. We have the ability as a nonprofit doing this work to really say, we want to serve all of the variety of needs that a young person has. We want to make sure that they are set up for long-term success. And part of that, in particular for young people, and especially queer and trans young people, is making sure that they have lifelong connections with supportive adults. We forget a lot of the time, and I'll talk about this in a sec as well, but when a case closes, a social worker, an attorney, a case manager, whomever, right, we can't be there forever for that child and family. And we shouldn't be. We're not designed, our roles are not designed to be that way. But sometimes there grows a dependence on those systems. And folks don't do a great job of making sure that families, that young people have what are called informal supports, basically the natural supports in your life, right? Friends, family, community, your faith community, whatever that looks like, right? Those natural supports. So at RISE, we really see permanency as holistically as possible. And when we're doing our training, so we've trained all of LA County DCFS, probation, we've worked with DMH, so Department of Mental Health, Health Services, and we also work on a state and national level. We make sure that we really try to hit home with them this understanding that permanency is really, really, really expansive. So some of the things that we are constantly working on addressing are these ideas of bias. Biases are different ways that we're conditioned, different stereotypes, myths, misunderstandings we have about people or groups of people. And the good news about biases is that we can unlearn those things. All of us have biases. Again, it's just part of how we are socialized in this world. But you can imagine that when these things are showing up from people who are in positions of power or authority, that creates a lot of challenges for any young person or family unit. So in the example of anti-gay bias or hatred, aversion, discrimination towards somebody who is or perceived to be or is associated with a LGB person, something we still really commonly hear, despite regulations saying you can't actually do this, we still have prospective foster parents who say, yeah, I don't want to have a gay kid in my home. I'm concerned about the influence they're going to have on the other kids in the home. In the case of anti-transgender bias, or the idea that hatred, aversion, discrimination towards folks who are transgender, perceived to be associated with, we still see a lot of improper placement of youth that isn't based on their gender identity, which they have a legal right to. And we hear, staff members at facilities saying things like, well, this documentation, this child's birth certificate says this, so that's what I'm going to call this child. I'm not going to call them this other set of pronouns, or make sure that they are affirmed in their gender identity. And then this idea of heterosexism, that everyone is or should be, or that the right way to be is heterosexual. I mean, we can really think of this just in general in the way that services are designed in the system. If you were somebody working in the system, you would never have to call a therapist, a hospital, a prospective foster parent, a legal service agency to find out if they were equipped to serve straight youth. You would never have to do that. However, on the other hand, we are constantly having to make sure that services are safe and affirming for LGBTQ plus youth. So again, these biases can permeate at an individual basis, so person to person, inter and intrapersonally, and at an institutional basis. And we've been doing a lot of work over the past decade or so to really try to interrupt those things. The other piece to permanency as well, and we talked a little bit, or the two other presenters talked about this as well, is that we're talking about a population of young people who are often touching a variety of other systems. So we might have what are called dual status youth, so youth who have been incarcerated and have a current or previous juvenile detention case, and now have a foster care case simultaneously. We may have youth who, of course, all kids are going to school, but who may have particular education needs. They may have unique health needs. They may be experiencing other housing instability, whether it's related to their identity or not. And then overall, the caregiver experience they're having, right? So understanding, again, that holistic piece to permanency is really key here in understanding LGBTQ plus youth. So some of the unique things that we do work around and that we are constantly educating folks on and helping people understand is the prevalence of caregiver bias and rejection and the impact that has. And these statistics, although they are alarming and upsetting, they come from the Family Acceptance Project, and they did some great research out of San Francisco State University to better understand the impacts of these things. So the big things that we see with caregivers, and we try to be as inclusive in our language as possible. So when we say caregivers, we're referring to anybody who's in the role of caregiving for that child or youth. Could be biological parent, it could be grandparent, aunt, uncle, sibling, another friend of the family, right? It could be anybody who's in that role. There's just a lot of misinformation about what it means to be LGBTQ+, even in this day and age. It can still be really hard to access resources for caregivers, especially resources that are culturally appropriate. So finding resources in other languages, at the reading level of that caregiver, in a lot of just different ways. And then understanding unique developmental needs and milestones of LGBTQ+ youth. So just normalizing that all of us have a sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression is something that's really new for a lot of caregivers and that many folks struggle with. So what this particular research found is that when young people who are LGBTQ+ are exposed to different forms of rejection, like name calling, exclusion, and other forms of rejection, they're 8 times as likely to have a suicide attempt. So not just suicidal ideation, but an attempt. And I want to note here that, again, this is an upsetting topic. And so if this is a topic that you feel like you need more resources around personally, the Trevor Project is an incredible suicide prevention organization. You can go to their website. They have a free chat line, phone line, and website that you can access resources for you or any friends who may need them. They also found that young people were 6 times as likely to report clinically high levels of depression, 3 times as likely to be at high risk for contracting HIV and other sexually transmitted infections, and 3 times as likely to use illegal substances. All of this, right, we can look at this and understand, well, yeah, if I'm being rejected, if I'm being hurt, if I don't feel supported, it makes sense that maybe I have some poor coping mechanisms. But the other thing about this picture that we have to understand when it comes to foster care is that all of these things start to correlate to less likelihood of being adopted or reunified or exiting with permanency. Because each of these types of things are things that may qualify a child for what's considered a higher level of care or just having higher needs. And ultimately, you then again, talking about other biases, you may have a social worker, you may have a foster or adoptive parent who is really interested in supporting a child, but they say, wow, this kid's been through a lot, this kid has a lot going on, right? And they just see this child as, being full of issues rather than being strength-based and saying, wow, this child is resilient. This child has experienced things that no child should have to experience because of who they are, and I want to support them through that. Right, so we can also understand that this impacts that LGBTQ plus child's likelihood of achieving permanency. Within the child welfare system, based on our research, we found that LGBTQ plus youth were at least 2 times as likely to report poor treatment by the system. So the formal system, be that group home providers, social workers, etc., than their heterosexual and cisgender peers, as well as 2 times as likely to live in a group facility. Again, so part of this thing that I mentioned earlier, the Continuum of Care Reform Act, was this idea that so many of our kids are being placed in congregate care, being placed in group settings. And how do we really prioritize kids being placed in family-like settings? Because we know that for lots of different reasons, that's their best bet for success for most kids. So if we already have a disproportionate rate of youth in the system, and then on top of that, these youth are disproportionately being placed in a group setting, right, in a institutionalized setting, we can kind of start to understand why these youth age out at much higher rates than their peers. And a lot of that has to do, again, other biases. So at any given case, right, any given single case that opens in foster care, there's dozens of people who come into contact with that case, whether directly or indirectly. And any number of those people can insert their biases and affect that case. Confidentiality and outing is still a really, really big issue. People not understanding not only best practice, but what the legal rights of children in care are. And then in California, it's not so much that there's a lack of legal framework. We in California have the strongest laws when it comes to protecting LGBTQ plus youth in all settings, in schools, in foster care, and just generally. But implementation, as I'm sure my peers in the space will tell you, is oftentimes where the rubber hits the road. You can have all the amazing laws and policies in the world, but if you don't have people who are really holding the powers that be to task and accountable, those laws just don't mean anything because they're not effective. And then another big issue is just that there's not enough placements to begin with, but the placements that exist, there are not enough that are affirming and explicitly safe for this population. And then we see some other kind of crossover in different places that cross over into other legal system challenges. I'm not sure if you've had this topic covered or will, Taylor, but you might see this acronym CSEC, which stands for Commercially Sexually Exploited Children. And LGBTQ plus young people are more likely to experience commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking. That, again, for lots of different reasons that we don't have time to get into right now, can complicate any given case, and certainly in addressing their needs. Mandated reporting laws, the laws that state that specific people, such as myself, are legally required to report any instance where we believe that a child is being harmed or at risk of being harmed. Sometimes these laws, they just operate in a way that doesn't take into account the full picture of that child's life. Doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. It just means that it can create challenges in how we respond. When it comes to getting something like a protection order, if you're a young person who is not only experiencing family violence, but maybe intimate partner violence, your access to legal recourse is oftentimes limited without involving the child welfare system or other systems that aren't really equipped to deal with lots of different legal issues. And then again, we sort of hit on this a little bit as well, but if you're an unaccompanied minor, if you have a delinquency status, and any sort of other legal situations going on, that absolutely can complicate things for you. So the last thing that I want to talk about before I just go briefly over what it is that we are kind of doing around this is just, as I mentioned, to give you a quick overview of, what the legal framework is. Knowing that many of you, you may be returning to other jurisdictions. The interesting thing is that in California, well, we have state laws that govern the child welfare system. Each child welfare system is county by county, whereas in a lot of other states, it's statewide. There's some exceptions to that. There's plenty of exceptions. For example, Maryland, there's one county that operates independently. The rest of the counties operate together. All that to say, though, that the legal framework looks different in every single state. As I mentioned, in California, we have the most protections for youth in care when it comes to your sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So some of those laws are laws, for example, that state that if you are a transgender young person, you have the right to be placed according to your gender identity, regardless of what your sex assigned at birth is. And that's an excellent law that really reaffirms a child's authenticity and honors their identity. We have a law that isn't child welfare specific, but specifically says that conversion therapy or reparative therapy, the idea that you could change somebody's sexual orientation or gender identity, that is against the law for a licensed mental health clinician to practice in the state of California. So we have a number of laws that do a really good job of protecting young people in the state. As I mentioned, though, they're not always great at being followed or implemented or known. In a lot of other states, as this map kind of shows you, and this map, by the way, is from the Movement Advancement Project. If you want to learn more about LGBTQ plus laws just generally, they have maps on a variety of different issue areas that you can kind of go and look, especially if you're not from California and want to better understand maybe what your state's laws are. But as you can see, a lot of other states do not have those protections. Unfortunately, as many of you probably know, over the past several years, this past year in particular, we've seen a big uptick in anti-LGBTQ plus legislation in other states, and in particular laws that target transgender youth. We've seen Supreme Court rulings that talk about a licensed foster care agency's ability to discriminate against LGBTQ plus foster parents and adoptive parents. So the political landscape, absolutely impacts all of this, because this is an identity topic, much like when we're thinking about immigration, that unfortunately people's identities are up for debate, and the rights and dignity that they deserve is often up for debate. So I encourage you just to learn more about, those laws and kind of better understand what's happening, wherever home is for you. So going back to kind of, again, what we are doing around this, because it's not all doom and gloom, we are trying to address this, and we have with our partners. As I mentioned, we did do that foster youth survey. Again, if any of you are really kind of research minded, thinking that might be where you decide to focus your studies, take a look at that study. It was a really difficult study to do. Anytime you're doing research that involves minors, it's incredibly hard. Now, when you get minors that are court involved, it took a lot of red tape and cutting through that red tape to be able to get permission and do it in a way that was ethical. And then we have, again, the team that I supervise that does a lot of this educational work, working at the policy level. For example, I sit on a couple of local and state boards to help work on policy and practice at a larger level. A couple days ago, I was doing work with a child abduction task force. That's an interagency task force with folks not just local to LA County, but the FBI, the United States Attorney, you name it, helping them better understand this population. So again, there's a lot of different ways that we're addressing this topic. And then at a very local level, we still provide case management support. So any young person who has an open DCFS case and who is experiencing challenges around their identity is eligible to receive our services free of charge. If they're not a good fit for those services, we can always refer them to other things. The survey, just to give you a couple of quick notes before I wrap up here, this just gives you some additional sort of visuals on what we found when we looked at the experiences of youth in care, both the identities, but then also, again, as I mentioned, so many young people, over a third of young people reporting discrimination. And again, you have to remember, not all of these young people are LGBTQ+, right? So we also interviewed young people who weren't, but still almost 40% of young people saying they were being discriminated against or harmed in the system. With our care coordination team, this is a team that I am always amazed with and proud of. It is a team that consists of a variety of disciplines. We have a clinician or a therapist. We have folks who focus on things like family finding. So making sure that when a case comes to us, we do a really, really deep job of trying to figure out who can be that support system for that child, even if they're not somebody who's going to be available to adopt them down the line or provide them housing. Who's somebody, maybe an old teacher, a friend, a colleague, right, who can be supportive of them. And so this team does a lot of incredible work. They also operate a monthly support group for monolingual Spanish speaking parents. Pre-pandemic, that was in person in Boyle Heights. These days, it's been held online because of the pandemic. So they do a lot of different work in the community to make sure that youth and family systems are supported. And then this, again, for any of you who might be thinking about going into any type of direct service work, just gives you a better sense of what that facing or what the kind of team structure looks like, excuse me. So I'm going to skip over that for the sake of time. But last but not least, there's again my team. And our work has been studied. We have had some great articles in the Child Welfare League of America's journal, and some great, pieces that talk about the fidelity and efficacy of our training modules and the ways that they actually reduce bias of not only caregivers who go through our training, but also professionals who go through our training. So again, lots of different ways that we're trying to address these issues of LGBTQ+ young people in the system at really high rates, having poor experiences when they're in the system, and exiting the system without achieving permanency. Just some other things, and I'm happy to send some goodies, some digital goodies to any of you who would like it, to Taylor as well. But if any of you want additional things, one of the things we believe strongly in is environmental cues. So the ways in which we're communicating to others what a place is or isn't about. So whether that be a pronoun button or pin, whether that be a poster that lets people know you're affirming. We do a lot of work, again, at the local, state, and national level to help agencies move towards a place where they can really be culturally prepared for this population. So I will wrap up there. That was a ton of information, but please, if you want to learn more about our program, here's our website. If you want to contact me, here's my contact information, super easy to remember. And again, if you're interested, if you want to volunteer with us, if you have questions, if you need resources, anything you want to talk about, feel free to hit me up.